Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. I know if you're watching this that you're enjoying the Bumps and Thumps podcast. In order to continue the podcast and get the guests on that everyone wants to hear about, we need support from listeners like you. There are a few ways you can do this. One is going to anchor.fm, which will be on the bottom of your screen here, and click the support button. There you can make a monthly contribution to support the podcast. There's also, we have a Teespring store. We have a link down at the bottom of the screen as well for that. And we have products such as t-shirts like this one I'm wearing, backpacks, glassware, and other great items for you to purchase. Those purchases go directly back into the podcast and get on guests that require financial compensation. Thank you again for your support. Go to those websites and support our podcast, and we will continue to bring the guests that you want to hear about, past and present. And thank you for your support and enjoy the podcast. Thank you for joining another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today is an author and co-author of many pro wrestling books, including Too Sweet, Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Keith Elliot Greenberg. Keith, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Brian. I really appreciate you having me here.
Oh, I'm just glad you're able to come on. I mean, I've read your bio and things, and you're a busy man.
I am a bit busy, yes.
You are a busy man, and you've written quite a few books too. So, in fact, we were just talking prior to recording. I'm in the middle of the Too Sweet book about the Indies, and it's an excellent read.
I really appreciate you saying that.
I highly recommend it, and we'll put that down in the description as well, your books and things like that. So, all right, so let's kind of get started. I want to talk a little bit first about, if we could, growing up. I know you're from New York.
I am.
Let's talk about how you're growing up in New York and your schooling and how you kind of got involved in the wrestling business.
Well, I grew up in a family where wrestling was on quite a bit.
Okay.
My mother's high school autograph book, it said favorite athlete, and she had Argentina Rocca in there. So when you're raised with that pedigree, you kind of gravitate towards things like professional wrestling. And my grandparents were from the former Soviet Union.
Okay.
And this would be in the 1960s, and they were big Bruno Sammartino fans. Took it very seriously. An immigrant who struggled much like them, and seemed to have obstacles put in his way, but always managed, a way to dig down and triumph, which they were never really able to do, but at least they felt inspired by someone like Bruno.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Well, after you got out of high school, I mean, you're a journalist, you're a writer. I'm assuming you went to college. And
I did, yes. Not that you have to be a professional writer, but I chose to go to college. Yes.
Where did you go to school at?
I started out at Queens College,
Okay.
and I've been a professional writer since I've been 19 years old. So, I started writing fairly young, and I was just, I just felt driven to earn a living that way. And just like now, there are websites where anybody can work. They may not get paid a lot, but they can get their name out there, and they can, indulge their passion and write about the things they care about. There were little newspapers and magazines to write for. Some paid better than others. Some barely paid at all, but that was the direction I took.
Yeah, I noticed doing some research on you. You have a very wide range of topics and subjects that you have written about, from the Latin group Menudo. That was your first book, I believe, if I remember.
By 1983.
Yeah, your first book about a Latin group.
Yeah.
pop group, wrestling to just a whole variety of
crime. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, just a variety of subjects. And it's just kind of interesting that you can do that. And I just wondered, how did you, and you talk about your grandparents, your parents being into wrestling, but what made you want to write about wrestling?
Well, I love wrestling. And, I wasn't athletic enough to become a wrestler. And so I wanted to learn more about the wrestling business. And this was prior to the first WrestleMania, prior to, wrestling being labeled sports entertainment. This was when wrestling was depicted as real life and death battles.
Mm-hmm.
And, I knew there was an element of showmanship there. I didn't know to what degree. And my goal was never to expose the business. It was to learn more about this way of life and this art form that fascinated me and a lot of others.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like I said, I did some research. You've written books or co-authored or been a part of books about Freddie Blassie, Ric Flair. I could go on.
Superstar Billy Graham. I co-wrote 2 editions of the WWE Encyclopedia of Sports Entertainment.
Okay.
So there's a lot there.
I just find it very interesting that you have such a variety and you have time for all of this. Have you had to write books, like multiple books at the same time?
No, I can't do that.
Okay. Well, you're the first author I've had on there that hasn't.
But I also have a full-time job. I work as a TV producer full-time.
Okay.
So, one book a year, is usually plenty to occupy me. And I also write articles on the side. So, I am trying to pace myself. I can do 2 things at a time. 4 things at a time is a bit difficult. And, I can be working on a book and be working at my full-time job and, find the time to do an article.
Yeah.
But I can't be working on 2 books and doing my full-time job and writing articles.
Yeah.
But I am proud to say that I have been writing for Inside the Ropes magazine in the UK.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a monthly column for them and doing, some more in-depth articles. And that's been one of my pleasures of life the last couple of years, working for those guys.
Yeah, I got that when it first came out the first year, and I read it. I mean, it's big, and I like that. It's got a lot of good articles, and I've read yours, and they're
and there's great writers. There's guys like Finlay Martin, who might not be that well known in this country, but every wrestling fan of a certain age in the UK knows him. So just like there's a group of fans who came up reading my stuff, and I came up reading Bill Apter's name and George Napolitano's name. There's a whole breed of fans that look up to Finlay Martin as an expert, and he is. He is. And then there's like young guys. There's this guy, Tom Forty, and much younger than I am. And he just has a touch, I read this article he wrote about collecting action figures, kind of like the figures you have around there.
Yeah.
And he talks about this recurring dream he would have about not, about losing an action figure. And he later read that Matt Cardona would have the same dream. So when somebody tells a story like that, it makes the article immensely relatable.
Yeah.
And as a writer, I'm always learning, and I'm not just learning from those who came before me. I'm also learning from those who've come behind me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You mentioned that because I just did an interview, I don't know, probably a week ago with Greg Oliver, and
good guy,
great guy,
and a friend.
Yeah. And he says, he likes wrestling, and I asked him about books, and he worked on 2 at a time. And
he writes about hockey also.
Yeah, he writes about hockey, and he has helped his child, helped him write a children's book, and
Yeah,
it's,
it's great. Yeah,
yeah,
really.
yeah. And I don't know if you know Kenny Casanova.
Of course I do.
Yeah,
Yes.
he's written books at the same time too. And I asked him the same question. I told him there is no way I could ever do that.
In fact, I'll tell you, Kenny Casanova is in my next book that's coming out.
Okay.
I have a book coming out in the fall called Wrestling. Well, it's called Follow the Buzzards, Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19.
Okay.
And it's about how wrestling dealt with COVID.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Kenny Casanova did was he organized this thing called, COVID Con, and he had wrestling authors on there, and as well as some wrestlers.
Wow.
It was, I think it may be the last public appearance for Tracy Smothers, and even Kamala popped on for a little bit. And that's, that's just a couple of months before each of them passed away.
Yeah.
And so they would pop on, and then Greg Oliver was on there, and I was on there, and it was fabulous because it was wrestling authors just talking about their books all weekend long. And like Friday night, we had like a dress rehearsal where you could come on if you wanted. It wasn't anything formal. And I came on Friday night, and I didn't turn the thing off for 48 hours. This was when everybody was locked in.
Yeah.
I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. Yeah. When I've talked to authors, it seems like it's a very close knit community. Even though you might be, well, Greg's in Canada.
I don't consider us competitors. I really don't.
No, I'm just saying that you guys know each other and interact.
We do know each other because I guess, the community of wrestling authors isn't really that wide.
That's true.
It's not like hockey authors or baseball authors or, soccer authors,
right.
So, there's maybe a couple of dozen of us at most, and we've all crossed paths at some point.
Yeah.
And we all have similar stories. We all have stories about, the challenges of sometimes getting along with talent, the challenges of drawing out talent to tell a story. I think we've all encountered talent that, who tend to go into character. And it's like, wait a second, I need to really know the underpinnings of the story, not to have you cut a promo on me.
Yeah.
And, so that's all a challenge.
Yeah.
And, in the book Too Sweet that you're reading, I actually mentioned Bertrand, who co-authored Pat Patterson's book, and with Pat LaPrade did that fabulous Andre the Giant book. And, Bertrand and I, we have a history because we were both competing to be chosen to do the Pat Patterson book. And Bertrand was the one who ultimately received the nod. And I say in the book, I'm pretty good at my craft, but after reading that touching book, I have to say in that one instance, the better man won.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that and write that in there because, most people wouldn't acknowledge that.
It's true. And he's a good writer and he's a friend. And, he puts me over all the time also,
Well, that's good.
And it's heartfelt.
Yeah. Yeah. Every person, a writer I've talked to on here has high respects for all the other ones. If I mention a name that I've done a podcast with, they just give them a bunch of kudos, and it's great.
Yeah, it's really intriguing because you would think sometimes there are so few scraps to grab that there would be competition or bad mouthing. And also the nature of the wrestling business, at least in the past, could be quite undermining. And I really don't find that. I find that when, I'm at an event and I run into somebody like, I usually sit in the press box at WrestleMania, and I'll see another wrestling writer and I'll go, hey, that was a great article you wrote. I, actually used some of that information in my last book. And, it's very respectful.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Speaking of, you talk about WrestleMania, I'm going to WrestleCon at the end of the month, which is the same weekend as WrestleMania in the same town.
I'll be stopping by. I'll be
there.
there.
Good. Well, maybe we can meet in person.
I'd love to meet in person.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I have a whole bunch of friends who are staying at the Fairmont Hotel
Yep.
where WrestleCon is
Yep.
taking place. So there's going to be a lot of socializing over
Yeah,
there.
I'm going to be there. I'm staying there as well, and looking forward to that. So
I'm actually staying at the GCW hotel, but it's not too far away.
yeah, well, I wanted to be where the action is. You know, it costs a little more, but I wanted to be there, and my wife was kind enough to let her and I stay there. So
Well, I mean, and how's your wife with hanging out at a wrestling convention all weekend?
well, that's yeah. Luckily, my oldest son lives in Dallas, so he's going to go to some of the stuff with me. But then my wife is just going to do her thing during the day. She's not.
She has things to do.
She has things to do. Yes.
It's not like you dragged me all the way to Dallas and
Yeah.
all I did was listen to people talking about wrestling.
Exactly. She has things to do, per se, as I quotations with my hands.
It's funny you say that. Last night I watched the AEW pay-per-view with
Yes.
and there's this bar in Brooklyn called DDT. It's a wrestling theme bar, and
Okay.
I can't say enough great things about them. But I met up with a group of friends, and one good friend has a girlfriend who just despises wrestling. And there have been a few times when we've been together, and you could see how exasperated she's getting. Like, oh, will this wrestling show ever end? And one of my other friends was sitting there, and he goes, "Well, you live." He's with her tonight. You live life, you choose your love, and we're sitting here. So I guess that says a lot about our life choice.
That's right. Let's talk about that. So, you've been doing this for quite a while, the wrestling part as well. Let's talk about the transformation from when you started late 70s, early 80s in wrestling, watching wrestling, writing about it.
Well, I've been writing about it since, I guess, the late 70s. I would say
Okay.
I started watching it in the 60s. I was born in the late 50s, but I was born in 59. So I must say, even though I have a good memory, I don't have any recollections of that. Wrestling in the 50s.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you what was that like for you when it was transforming to, basically brute brawlers, good guys, bad guys. There was a very good distinction of that to now where it's kind of blurred. It's more of entertainment aspect. What is that like for you?
I mean, when you're a kid, this comes up all the time in conversation, both when I'm interviewed or when I'm with friends.
Yeah.
You always romanticize what you watched as a kid.
Right.
So naturally, I look back on that era where I was just learning about wrestling and learning about different territories and seeing certain wrestlers for the first time. And, it just seems like the greatest time in the world to be alive. But, I imagine that some kid who's going to see Brock against Roman Reigns and is 8 years old at WrestleMania, that kid will be 30 years old in 20 years, 38 years old in 20 years, and will say, man, wrestling's not like it was, like WWE in, 2022. Oh, that was when it just ruled, man. Or, remember, they'll say, remember Bray Wyatt? Oh, he's gone. They'll be talking about tag teams like the Usos and the New Day. Yeah. And, that stuff and they'll be talking about Bianca Belair and Becky Lynch. And, that stuff will age well. Whatever you want to say about WWE, there's some great talent there, and that stuff will age.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're doing something right, obviously, or they wouldn't be as successful as they are. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And same with AEW. You talked about.
And AEW is very exciting.
Oh, yeah.
And it's an exciting time to be a wrestling fan. I mean, I do talk about the Wednesday Night War in my upcoming book on wrestling during the time of COVID. And I am sad to see that over because not that I wanted NXT and AEW to be on at the same time, because I felt that both products were very good.
Yeah.
But there's something about, trying to outdo your adversary. And trying to give people the best show possible.
Yeah.
And now NXT is a different kind of show. They still have great talent, and there's still, great matches to be seen there, but it's not like they're not AEW and NXT don't have their swords crossed anymore. It's more like AEW versus WWE as a whole.
Yeah. I can see that. So what did you think of the pay-per-view last night?
I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. I unfortunately I live out in the middle of nowhere, and I don't have a satellite, so I just get the bits and pieces from the next day on YouTube or whatever. But from what I saw and what I've read, I thought it was really well done.
There's just such great matchups. Look at this talent there. You have Thunder Rosa and Dr. Britt Baker. Adam Cole and Hangman Page in the ring together. Moxley and Danielson in the ring together. And even the pre-show, it's legit Layla Hirsch against Chris Statlander. It may not sound like a lot on paper, but watching that match, that was a really intense match.
Yeah.
And so, it was, and being with friends, I was there with 3 friends and we were watching together. And, then the owner would come by and the bartender would come by and we'd be dissecting what we just saw. And I'm so grateful to be part of this community that loves something as much as I do.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a small community. And sometimes, because I have my personality when I was working and all that full time and everything, my demeanor was quite different, and people were really shocked when, you like professional wrestling? You watch that?
Right.
I'm like, yeah. They're like, you don't seem like that type of person.
Right. Well, that's a cliche. It's a stereotype.
Yeah.
It's a demeaning thing to say. It's like people would say, to me, oh yeah, you're Jewish. You don't really act Jewish. Like, what's that supposed to mean?
Right? Yeah. Right? What do you mean by that?
And so it's like, you don't really act like a wrestling fan. It's like, why don't you elaborate on that?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
how am I supposed to act?
Yeah. It's really odd, but it is what it is.
Well, look, I know what the stereotype of the wrestling fan is. We all know what the stereotype is. And I have a very good friend, and she told me, when she was growing up, her mother told her, never date a wrestling fan or a NASCAR fan. And I get what her mother was trying to do. But then this, woman moves to New York, and she was working at NBC the same time I was. And she would see me get together with these 4 other guys who worked with me at NBC, and we would just pick apart the most recent pay-per-view she saw. And she goes, I never would imagine that wrestling fans speak like this. It's like, you mean that we can string an entire sentence together? Yes, there's a few of us who can.
The effective communication.
Yeah.
So, you've done a lot of traveling, I'm sure, to different events around the country, probably around the world.
Yeah.
To me, what my question is, what was probably your most exciting or most memorable event that you have been to in recent memory for you?
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I like to keep my enthusiasm fresh. Mm-hmm. And so rather than looking back on an event I saw 20 or 25 years ago, and there's some great ones. I mean, Hulk Hogan against The Rock in Toronto was pretty fantastic, and to see the crowd turn like that and to see both of their reactions, that looms pretty large at WrestleMania. But look, recently I was at AEW Grand Slam, and I was at the first WrestleMania last year where WWE had a live crowd, in Tampa. And I was just at a GCW at the Hammerstein Ballroom. Okay. And I was at Ring of Honor's Final Battle, and that was the closing of a chapter. And those were all special events, and I'm privileged to have been at all of that. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, you have a good perspective on it. I mean, when I ask that to others, they give me a specific event, but That's interesting. I mean, I guess for me, I enjoy all of them, so I can't really say a specific one. But this will be my, like we were talking about WrestleCon a moment ago. This will be my first one. I'm excited. I'm a little nervous, I'll be honest, because some of the guys there are legends, and it's going to be kind of,
Well, it's daunting to see
Yeah.
them in person,
yeah,
just like it was daunting to start interviewing some of these guys who I
Yeah.
always looked up to.
Yeah.
But they're human beings like
Yeah.
you are, like I am. They're gratified that people remember them, that people recognize them, that people want to see them. They definitely, have their feet on the ground in many ways. And I feel like, actually, like a guy like Greg Oliver can talk about this. In some ways, wrestlers are a little bit like hockey players. They're almost like blue collar athletes, and they remember where they came from. And a lot of wrestlers today remember being fans,
Yeah.
and they know what it meant to have a wrestler be good to them and
Yeah.
treat them with courtesy. Now they expect courtesy in return.
Right.
They don't want you like, badgering them on an airplane or,
Right.
barging, into their table when they're, having dinner with their families when they've been
Right.
traveling. But, you show them respect, and you show them, your appreciation. And I think it's appreciated back.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. No, I'm excited to go down there and interact with.
And you know what? You're going to go down there, and I predict this. You're going to make friends who are going to be your friends years from now, of other fans.
Yeah. Actually, I know a couple guys that are going to be there already. Jim Brunzell is going to be there. I've met him and actually went out to dinner with him when he was in Crusher Fest last fall, him and Greg Gagne. So yeah, I'm looking forward to establishing more relationships.
And all you had to do was pay the bill.
I didn't have to pay the bill. That was the nice part. He paid his own. I offered.
I'm joking.
No, I know you are. I know you are. But it's going to be a good time. I'm really going to enjoy it. So, like we talked about earlier, your difference in pro wrestling from yesteryear to now. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you think it's progressed ultimately in a positive way?
Look, I see all the varied perspectives. I understand, and this has been going on not just recently. 20 years ago, guys were complaining to me, like, look at these young guys, they just fly all over the place. Certainly, the standard is higher now. Guys are expected to do more spectacular things, and sometimes I worry that they might get injured more as a result of that. I think they're better educated now in terms of the pitfalls that could befall them. I think that they have legitimate people giving them financial advice now, so they're not going to end up like Mickey Rourke's character in The Wrestler, hopefully. So there's a lot of positives about now.
Yeah.
And the art of storytelling evolves, and the best wrestlers are people who grew up enjoying a good story in the ring, and they've taken some lessons and expanded on it.
Yeah.
And you have guys also who've been trained by Dusty Rhodes in NXT and Shawn Michaels in NXT and at his training school. I mean, real storytellers. When I was writing Too Sweet, I went to a gym in Brooklyn, and before the show started, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was conducting a seminar for a group of wrestlers.
Okay.
And Barry Horowitz, I remember, was sitting there in the audience, and he said, back when I was coming up, you had to be lucky to get a ride in his car to hear this kind of wisdom. Mm-hmm. Now you're getting this education, you pay the guy a couple of $100 and here it is right in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other I've had on the podcast, older wrestlers, they always say that when they went in the ring, they didn't know anything. They just the fundamentals of the craft, but as far as the other stuff, didn't have a clue and had to learn
Right. And there's a beauty in that.
There is a beauty in that. I mean, it makes you muscle memory, I guess, is the
muscle
best term I could
memory
use.
and spontaneous creativity.
Yeah.
And, but, these guys did, a lot of them, were married to each other, so to speak. They would work together a lot. And I guess, you work with the same person, you develop a chemistry, and then you can just have a very spontaneous dance. And that's, it's a wonderful thing. And, sometimes like when I'm watching a match, like actually at the GCW show, I saw Matt Cardona wrestle Joey Janela. And I was like, and Chelsea Green, was interfering on behalf of Cardona. And I'm like looking at her face at one point, and she looks like she's about to burst out laughing. And I'm like, these guys are having a great time. It's almost like when you're a kid and you're playing wrestling with your friends in the park or in the playground. They looked like they were having that much fun. Yeah. And I'm sure for all the pressures, there are people who know how to tap into that sense of fun.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's, you said Chelsea Green. I know they're married, and now he's the current NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And I hope things go well for him. I know he's got a match in a couple of weeks with Nick Aldis on the 19th, I believe, and we'll see how that goes. And
look, and there's a story there, like Nick Aldis is basically, when it comes to the NWA of today, probably the most esteemed representative of the NWA.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then you have a guy like Cardona, who, even though in real life he clearly respects wrestling traditions, he pretends that he doesn't.
Yeah.
And so, it's a natural issue between them.
Yeah.
And that means it's going to be a fun match.
It'll be a good match. Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. So let me ask you this, and it might be an oddball question for you, but like I said, you've written a variety of books, from Menudo to Too Sweet. Out of all the books that you've written or co-authored, or what has been the one that just sticks out in your mind?
Well, the one that I just finished, of course, because that's the book I'm trying to sell.
Yeah.
Writing, I mean, I'll say what makes this book, follow the Buzzards, pro wrestling in the age of COVID-19. The challenge was, as I was writing it as these events were unfolding. And so, I'm observing and I'm writing about it. It almost at times felt like I was keeping a diary. And then I submitted the book to ECW Press, and it was a couple of months before they actually got around to reading it. And during those few months, I actually had a chance to reread it and fill in some voids over there. Or, like I'm describing in chapter 1, this match between Hangman Page and Kenny Omega when their team first breaks up. And lo and behold, exactly 1 year later, this leads to Page defeating Omega for the championship. And so there were a lot of things that were dangling when I first started writing them that have since resolved themselves. And I was able to go back and tie a lot of loose ends together.
Yeah, I mean, hey, that's good that you were able to have a chance to reread it and kind of
and also look,
touch-ups.
COVID, it was such a unique period.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to have, you had WWE. The cinematic match existed in some form before. I mean, there was the, boiler room match between, Mankind and who was it? Mankind and is it Piper? No. You had the Goldust and Piper had that brawl where they were on the freeway, in each other.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, you had cinematic matches to an extent in the past, but during COVID, you had both major companies becoming reliant on the cinematic match. And WWE, again, I'm going to give them credit. You know, you have at WrestleMania 36, you had the Undertaker AJ Styles match, which felt like you were watching a Western on TV. And the next night you had, Bray Wyatt against John Cena. And that was like you were watching an art film. So two very different genres, but both cinematic matches. And then AEW came up with the Stadium Stampede.
Yeah.
And, then WWE created the Thunderdome to compensate for the lack of live fans. And, you have to salute them for improvising and keeping the fans entertained like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and competition, for a number of years, you're talking about WWE, they were pretty much the standalone. I mean, there was Impact in there for a while, or TNA, but until really the last 2 or 3 years, when AEW, they've had to kind of kick it in high gear again, and kind of like when the WCW, the Monday Night Wars, 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, it's kind of getting back to that, where that competition makes you want to do more.
Yes, it does. It makes you want to do more. And that makes it a good time to be a wrestling fan.
Yeah. No,
and look at it's different. Here's where it's different. When I was growing up, we weren't speculating. We were reacting. We didn't know anything about the business. So if you were, a fan, you were rooting for certain people to win. You were rooting for certain enemies to get in the ring and fight. And now when you're watching like a drama critic. And that's different.
Yeah.
But I still look forward to it.
Yeah.
But my fandom has had to evolve along with the business.
Right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You gotta, and they've always, I will say this, the business has evolved, especially the last 4 or 5 years. Like I said, that competition really drives the rival promotions to compete and come out with better or new ideas, and that's a good thing. So, and for writers like yourself and Greg Oliver and Kenny and all them, I think it's good for you guys, because you have more things that you can,
we have new things to write about
and can talk about, and it's not just WWE. This is all they've done this week in a magazine. Now it's Impact, it's AEW, it's
New Japan,
and
now we can speculate what form will the new Ring of Honor take under Tony Khan. Where will NXT 2.0 be a year from now? When will Braun Breaker transition to the main roster? How will he do on the main roster?
That's the great part about that now, because that's kind of the way it was in the 80s, when you had all these different territories and promotions, when Pro Wrestling Illustrated, all those magazines, Inside Wrestling, you had different topics at different promotions talking about different things, which was great because there was such a variety. And I think that
variety, and that was an interesting period, because the 80s was when it was really the tail end of the territory system. But for a period, you were suddenly exposed to a number of them because of cable TV. Previously, in the 70s, I couldn't see wrestling from Texas. I couldn't see wrestling from Atlanta. I didn't have cable TV. Now I could watch wrestling on TBS. Now I could watch the NWA champion on TV, and I could watch the Von Erichs. I remember, I didn't have cable yet, but I remember I was dating someone who had cable, and she only lived like a mile or two away from me. And I remember I once came over her place, and suddenly she's like looking for me, and I'm like sitting there watching World Class, and she's like, "Is that why you came here?" And it's like, well, a little bit.
Part of the reason, but mainly you.
One of the reasons.
This is benefit,
I don't think she realized that's what I meant when I said friends with benefits.
There you go. That's great. So, all right, one final question. So, what are you doing now, sir? I know you just finished your book. What, are you working on another project?
I just finished a story on for Inside the Ropes on diversity in wrestling that was triggered by the controversy that got stirred up when Big Swole left AEW, and I analyze, the history of the way different minorities have been portrayed in the wrestling business, and how certain personalities felt, and how certain gimmicks wouldn't go over now. And, I interviewed Black wrestlers, I interviewed some openly gay wrestlers, and I also went through different interviews that people have done over the years. And that story ended up being 6,700 words.
Wow.
So, I said, how much, space do I have? And, then I just kept going, and right now, I'm just taking a breather because I just finished that book on wrestling during the time of COVID. It was just copy edited. I went through the copy editing, notes this weekend. We have to pick out photos perhaps later this week. So I, then I go to WrestleMania and cover stuff for Inside the Ropes. And so, I have to give myself a little bit of breathing room before I start conceptualizing the next book. Because if I'm doing another book, this has to be something I'm really passionate about, so I can get myself worked up.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to that Wrestling with Buzzards, COVID-19.
Follow the Buzzards, which is actually Buzzards, okay. Follow the Buzzards, pro wrestling in the age of COVID-19.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to mess up the title.
No, that's fine. You don't even, it's not even on Amazon yet.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to when it comes out, because I'll definitely purchase it. Like I said, I'm reading Too Sweet right now. I will. I will. And hopefully we can run into each other at WrestleCon.
Yeah, I'd love to see your WrestleCon.
I'd love that too.
We'll, we may just run into each other because we'll be in the same place. But reach out to me. I'd love to stop and chat with you.
I will. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Keith Elliot Greenberg, sir, thank you for coming on. If you're listening, thank you. If you're watching, thank you. And we will talk to you soon.
Okay. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.